Well, Mike always likes the
It is recording, but you know what? He's going to edit this out because
that's true.
People are going to say "f*** on here," and you know it'll be terrible. Yeah, I'm all kilt lights. So, if anybody needs the bathroom, it's down here. If you drink too much beer, don't feel like you can't get up in the middle of the presentation. And
yeah, don't worry about it. Anyone wants to get up and get a beer, we'll all just stop and wait for you. Okay, so
that's okay. No, I'm just looking at. No, it's okay. I'm going to go sit over there.
Yeah, well, I was about to say, if you give me a second, in a second I'm gonna see how you guys can see the screen, but just really quick, maybe by show of hands, let's say high, you use React a lot, low, you've tried it out, down, you've never ever touched React. Oh, there, okay. So you guys with your hands way up are gonna hate all the things that I skip. And you guys with your hands low or down are gonna hate how much shit I'm gonna talk about. Okay, so font, right? How we doing back there? No, way in the back. Guy with the big glasses who was yelling at me.
It's okay.
It's all right? All right, so we are talking about React. And just so everyone knows, I'm gonna use a lot of little shortcuts here because when I start off presenting, I get like really nervous hands. So we're gonna start off just in the browser. So there's not gonna be any hardly any ES6. It's going to be plain old JavaScript for a minute. We're going to leave that really quick, so don't get too comfortable. But we're just doing it right here in the browser. And what I'm doing is I'm bringing in two libraries. One's React, right? That's what lets us write React components. The other one is React DOM, which translates those components to our current environment, which is the DOM, the browser. Just like React Native would translate those components to iOS or Android. So React is what we're writing our components in. React DOM sticks it in the browser for us. So I'm going to start off with, whoops. Those are my shaky hands I was talking about. So I've just created a div here with an ID of app, and I'm creating a regular old JavaScript script tag, right? Everyone here's got some familiarity with JavaScript, right? Ooh, all right. So regular old, whoops. Regular old function. My function is called item. This is our React component. React components are just functions, and I'm going to say that a lot, especially in this first part, but that's all React components are. The body of this function, where I'm going to return, is using something called react.createElement. Are we still doing okay on the font back there? Okay. React.createElement is as low level as you can get with React. It's really at the core of what React does, or I would say it's a super important piece of React. I'm going to jump through what these arguments are, but I'm going to expand on this, so just bear with me. The first argument here is, in my case, it's going to be the HTML element that I want to render in the DOM. That could also be another React component, so React components can render React components. The second argument into React.createElement is for something called props, and we're going to come back to that in just a moment. And the third argument on, so if I have a third argument, a fourth argument, a fifth argument, that is what's called children. So we're just going to do hello world, right? So this is our item component, it's our hello world component. And I save that, nothing's going to happen in the browser there because I need to give that over to React DOM and say render it in the browser. So this is React DOM.render. I'm going to do this just as a function because again, I really want to drive that home. The first argument is the component that I want to render to the DOM. Second argument is where do I want to render it? So that's just going to be the little div that I made with the ID of app. So I save that guy, and I'm going to zoom this one in, and there we go. We've got a div there that says hello world. Item, in this case, is a React component. Now, I said that the second argument, sorry, this guy, is props. When we're using React.createElement, the second argument is props. And props are really just a word we use in React for arguments into a function. That's all it is. And what I'm going to do is, so where I have null right there, that would be the props for the div. I'm going to pass props into this function, just like we would any other function. It's just an argument for the function, right? No big deal. And the way I would get that in plain old JavaScript is props dot. I'm going to pass in an object. Sorry, I should have said that with a key of name. So here is my object with a key of name. Say Joe, right? And we all know what that's going to do. it's just gonna, take that props argument into the function and write it out. Like this is JavaScript 101. This is basic, simple stuff. But item right now is a React component. Now I'm gonna tweak this because I wanna make sure I'm not diverging too far from what I should be showing you. But I'm gonna do React.create element here instead of item as a function. But you saw me call it as a function. It can just be called as a function. And the first argument here is going to be item. That's the component I want to render. And now I'm just going to pass those props in, right? Gym. So now it's going to render gym. So I just rendered my item in React.create element, and I passed it that prop, which was just an argument. It's an object that has a key of name. So I'm going to create one.
Can you wrap the text?
Yeah.
Or
Well, I'm not going to wrap it, but I will. How's that? Happy? Okay, so I'm going to create another one here. It's going to be called items. I think you see where I'm going with this. React.create element. I'll just do another div here. Null on the props of the div. I'm going to break this line out a little bit. And again, I'm going to do React.create element. And you know what? I'm just going to copy this down here and drop it right there. So now I've got this item component. It's rendering a div with an item inside of it, right? So down here, instead of rendering out item with any props, now I'm just rendering out items. It's rendering out the singular item component. I'll update that so you can see something change, right? So all that's working. Now I had said that the third argument on is what we call children. So this is one argument after null, right? So it's the third argument. I could string these together, and this is Jim, this is John, and it rendered 3 of these item components. Pretty straightforward, yeah.
Yeah, are you going to put this on the website for the Meetup?
Yeah, the source code for all of this
Yes.
will be available, but it's like a real piece of crap right now. So give me like the weekend to clean it up, and then it'll be on GitHub. The video also will be up on the Meetup site.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. So
Okay, thank you.
I see you taking notes, and that's awesome. But yeah, just go back and watch the video, and I'll go pretty slow here. There's going to be some cakes in the oven. So I just rendered 3 of these guys by stringing them together, and something that's fairly important to let me just change one name here. What I did is I just wrapped that in brackets, so now these 3 items are in an array, and nothing's going to change other than I changed that one name just so you could see I actually updated it. But the interesting thing about that is we can manipulate an existing array. So I'm going to bring in an array that I already kind of had set up. This is an array of objects. Each one has a name, and the name value happens to be a shape. So I called it const shapes, right? So what I'm going to do here, instead of having a hard-coded array, is I'm going to take an array, map over it, and return item components. Everyone's familiar with map? Yeah? Okay. So I'm taking my shapes. I'm doing a little ES6 stuff here. Sorry about that, guys. Each shape is now called item, and I'm going to return React.create element item. Here's my props name is item.name. That looks good, but I am getting a little squiggly there, so I think I hit something. Yeah, something's off. Shapes like that.
You have too many open curlies and not enough closes.
Nope. Okay. Thanks for trying to confuse me though, Mark. I wasn't nervous or anything. So there's our shapes, right? So we just mapped right over that, and this is a really common thing to do in React. Like this is, you do this all the time. You take an array of data and you transform it into a group or an array of components. So, I mean, that's really it for React.create element. I am going to show something really quick here. I'm getting this error that says each child in the array should have a key prop. And I can solve that very easily, but I'm going to talk about why it needs that. So I'm just passing in I'm complying with the error here, just passing in the index of the item from the array as this key value. And the reason React wants that is probably a little bit bigger than the explanation I'm going to give you, but it's a really great way for me to explain that. When I do React.create element, is everyone familiar with document.create element? So if you're in the DOM and you just want to create a div or something, you say document.create element div, and you've got a div. Unlike document.create element, React.create element, this is not I didn't start recording the screen.
Oh shit! Hey Joe, record the screen.
1 second, guys. I'll fix this later somehow.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. Whatever. We'll see. Uh-oh. Oh, yeah. There you go. Okay, so React.createElement is not a DOM operation. This thing is not creating divs in the DOM. I don't say, like, take this div from React Create Element and stick it in the DOM. What we're doing is we're describing what the DOM should look like to what's called the virtual DOM. So React operates on a virtual DOM. That's what they call it. And this is an in-memory tree structure that represents how the DOM nodes are going to be laid out. Like, think of it as, a giant array of arrays that says, here's where all the things go, here's the information they have. And it doesn't write that out to the DOM like the second I do something. When our props change, our function gets recalled at some point, it figures it out in the virtual DOM, and then figures out the least amount of changes that it needs to make in the real DOM to affect that outcome. So rather than like blowing away a whole portion of the page just to replace a little piece of data, it actually drills down in its in-memory representation of the DOM and figures out like, oh, all that needs to change is this little piece of text. Let's just update that in the DOM. And when you've got a lot of changes going on, it's actually queuing all those up and executing them in batches for you. Which is why in React we tend to think about things as just like re-render everything. Like we don't worry about having to be very particular about, how are we only going to update this little div, because we just kind of let React take care of that stuff for us. Okay, so I have notes on my phone, and I want to make sure I'm covering everything. All right, so these, we're gonna jump to JSX. I'm actually going to copy all this stuff, and I'm going to kill most of what we have here. Just leave this as an index page and find my index.js and close that guy. So we're going to move on to using more ES6, and we're going to look at something called JSX. What I'm doing here is I've got this index.js, and I'm using something called Webpack, and this won't be a talk about Webpack, but what happens is it takes this code, transpiles anything that needs to be transpiled, converts it to ES5 or takes this JSX stuff, and I'll tell you what that's going to convert it to as well. And then it automatically injects it into the HTML file we already have open. So here I'm going to import React, and I'm going to import React DOM. And fundamentally, if I save this, everything works, right? This is all just fine. But what I want to do is show you something called JSX. Has anyone here heard of JSX? Yeah, Steve? All right. This guy? Okay.
I have a question. How did that just work?
It's all the same code.
No, but are you running?
Yeah, I'm running Webpack, and I've got a little Webpack dev server going on. So it's automatically taking whatever I write in here, transpiling it to ES5, creating a little bundle.js, and injecting it into that index.html.
Gotcha.
So this has been running the whole time, but before I was just writing right there in the index.html. And now I'm writing in the index file. That's just, again, it's going to get transpiled and just injected right in there.
So you didn't have to update your index.html to do that?
Other than kill all the crap that I had in there, yeah. Cool. Okay, so all I'm going to do right now is rewrite these functions. So this is a function called item. I'm using fat arrow syntax, but I'm hoping everyone's okay with that. And I'm going to recreate item here. So what do we know about it? It gets props, right? And it's going to return this React.createElement, which is a div with props.name inside of it. So in JSX, I just write a div, right? It's important to note that even though that looks like HTML, it's actually JSX. That piece of code right there gets transpiled to React.createElement div. Okay? So if you thought React.createElement was, if it's hard to grasp that that's not a DOM operation, it gets a little more tricky to realize that this div is a function. This is React.createElement. Now, the part that I want inside of that div is a JavaScript expression, because I want to get this from my arguments here. So we just interpolate that with curly brackets. So where we want to do a JavaScript expression inside of JSX, we just interpolate it, we just wrap it in curly brackets. That's all we do. Forget that I said interpolate, just wrap it in curly. So here, I just say props.name, and I'm going to kill this one, save that. And these two functions, so it worked, right? These two functions are identical. And the reason we use JSX is because, and we're going to write some more complex components, but the reason we use JSX is because if you wanted to write out, think about a table, I got to do React.create element table, null, React.create element, T head, and then a TR inside of that, and then another one, and then you get into table dialogues and stuff, and all of a sudden your React.create element statements are just nested from here to eternity. That's why we let the virtual DOM deal with that crap. But when we're writing JSX, that's what we're doing. It's just getting converted over to React.create element. Okay, so items, right? Items has no props right now. I'm gonna break this one up a little bit. So what are we doing? We're returning a div, right? So we got React create element div, and then we got this stuff. So I'm just gonna bring that up here. Wrap that in curly brackets. Clean that up a little bit, and that'll work. But right here, and this is kind of an important bit, where I'm doing React.create element item. So item is that component that we just created. We can now call our own components using JSX. So item is my tag, and I need to get those props in there, right? So up at item we had props, and I'm passing in a name, and I also had this prop of key that was required by React. So to do that, in the JSX syntax, I'm just going to say key equals I. And the I is a JavaScript variable, so I'm interpolating that, or wrapping it in curly, sorry. Name equals, equals item.name, and then just close that guy. Whoop.
Yeah, it's m.name.
Thank you, linters. So yeah, I think this could actually just go like that, right? So that refresh and everything worked. So that's the key there. JSX saves us a lot of time, a lot of typing, and then we can use our own components in the JSX format. And to pass those props in, those props that are function arguments, they look like attributes now, right? Nice and simple. So that thing got props in the item component. It's just an object. I could call this whatever I want. It's an object made up of the attributes, the attribute-looking things that I attach to it. So it's got a key of key and a key of name, and I can just get those, right? The other one that I should do really quick is this guy. So items, right? All this is going to work the same. So I'm going to kill some of this. All right, so what we've been doing so far, these are called stateless function components. They just take in props, and they are the result of those props. Any calculation we might do on those props is part of that, but if I pass the same props in, I'm going to get the same function or the same results out over and over and over, and they don't have a lot of control over what they're doing. They can evaluate stuff, but they're just functions. They just return whatever I tell them to return. There is another way to create a React component, and this is called a class component. And there's still kind of an ES5 way to do this, but it's very much dying, so I'm not going to bother going into that. But we create a new class from React.component. So React is a library, has this thing called component, which fundamentally is an object, and we're extending that. And you could do this in ES5 with like object.create, and then you would just bring in React.component and kind of do some of this stuff. But anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I'm going to create this new component called catalog. So unlike the function that just spits out, the JSX, class components have a built-in method called render, and that's the thing that's going to spit out the JSX. Okay. Now the main difference, or probably the most important difference between stateless function components and class components, is that term stateless. Props in all components are meant to be passed in, but not changed. They're just information coming into the function. We're not doing, by ref, by value. We're never changing the information that was sent to us. We're just responding to it. Whereas state is its internal state for the component. It's meant to be managed by the component. So I'm setting up a constructor, and I'm going to call super. This is all just standard ES6 stuff. This isn't React specific. We call super so that we can use the this keyword right here in our constructor. And there's a bunch of different ways to do this. I don't know if anyone's up on ES7, but I am doing this the slow and hard way for your benefit. Because if I do it ES7, I just say state equals object and I'm done. Property initializers, man. Yeah, you don't have to do any of this crap. Anyways, so I'm creating a state for my component. This.state, it's equal to an object. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a little form so we can search through these guys. And if I didn't say it, I'm calling this catalog because we're eventually going to turn this into a little shopping cart. So right now, search is null. And what I'm going to do is I should probably take a look at my notes, but I'm just going to run with it. So I'm going to be returning a div, and inside that div, I'm going to have an input. Okay, it's just a standard looking input, but again, this is JSX. Like, always keep that in mind. I think people really get lost on that, where you get really into JSX and you start forgetting, hey, it's all just React.create element. So on this input, I'm going to have an on-input event. So React gives us a whole bunch of different event listeners that we can plug on to whatever we want. So you got your on clicks, your on double clicks, your on blurs, cut, copy, paste, whatever. Everything you would have with any other UI library, and as well as just kind of built into the DOM. Now, the very special thing about React is, so if I had a whole bunch of these in regular HTML and JavaScript, I'd have all these event listeners all over the place, firing off, listening to individual inputs and so forth. React, first, it normalizes our events across all the browsers, so we don't have to worry about doing different stuff for different browsers. But it also creates a single event listener in the DOM. If I have 100 of these, there are not 100 event listeners. There's a single event listener that everything in my virtual DOM, when it executes one of these events, gets passed to that single DOM event listener, and it figures out the rest for us. It says, who are you, where'd you come from, what else should I be doing, here's your information back, whatever. So single event listener from React. So inside of this, I'm going to interpolate this, change search, and I'm going to say bind this. Now, two things here. One, to bind this, there's like a million different ways you can do that. I'm just choosing to do it this way. Just make sure that when I send this up, I can use the context of this. Again, ES5, ES6, ES7, lots of different ways to do that. Much shorter ways to do that, but this is pretty standard. Now, change search, unlike render, which is a built-in method that I can rely on, as long as I define it, the component's going to run that at a specific time for me. Change search is not a built-in method. This is my own little custom method that I'm just adding to the component. I'm telling the component, hey, you've got a change search method. This is going to take in an event, just like a regular DOM event. And what I want to do is I want to get the value from that input and set my search in my state to that value, right? Nice and easy. So I'm going to call this .setState. I'm going to set search to, what is it, e.target.value. Okay? Nice and simple. So I run this, not much is going to happen. I want to see my input field.
Is it not in your render? Did it down?
No, it's definitely in the render. Let me just check something, guys. Sorry.
Below. Yeah, the React DOM render doesn't need to be in the bottom.
You know what? I'm rendering items, not catalog. Thank you. So we just made a new component, and I was still rendering items into the thing. Okay, so what I don't have is my items, which is fine. I'm just going to take this stuff that we had up here in items. I'm going to bring it down here to our new catalog component, right? And instead of shapes coming in, instead of getting that from the constant, I'm going to say this dot props dot items, and I'm going to pass that in. If you're not figuring out, I'm setting stuff up for way later. So now I'm passing in those items as a prop. I'll save this, and we've got our search field, but nothing's going to happen because all I did was I updated my search, the state. It's just a string. It's not actually having an effect on the DOM yet. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to bore you with writing this out. So I've got this little function I already built called filtered items, and all it does is it gets search from state. It gets items from the props. If we have no value of search, it just returns those items. And if we do, I just do a quick filter on here to see if we happen to have the string that you're looking for in our items, right? So here, instead of props.items, I'm going to say this dot filtered items. And so that'll know if we have state of search, filter those items. If we don't, just send me those items. So now, I type C, I get that. I type T, I get that. Pretty basic stuff. The important thing to note here is, just like with props, if our state changes, render gets called again. Okay, anytime we change state or props that come in change, our render method functions again. It calls it again, it figures it out. So, all this virtual DOM stuff happens and it says, what should the DOM look like? And this is a very simple component, but this happens in a very large tree of a large application. It's figuring out where all those little changes. So it's like, where did state change? And now I need to look at everything below that and all the nodes below that and figure out what do they need to look like. So anytime state changes, render runs. Okay, so along with state, class components get a bunch of what are called lifecycle methods. And these are all of them. And I'm just going to run through them really, really quick. So we get component will mount. And just to mention, these run at very specific times that I'm going to explain right now if you define them in your component. If you don't define them, they're not running. So I say, hey, you have a component will mount, do this during your component will mount, then it'll fire. Component will mount fires right before we mount it to the DOM, okay? The render at that point has kind of already been parsed out. It knows that it is going to run. There could be an error there, but it's good with it. Component DidMount is right after that. Now our component's in the DOM. If we ever need to reach out to the real life DOM, this is a good place to do it. Component will unmount is, we're going to take it out of the DOM. So it's a good place to clean up anything. You might have, some set interval if you're, an asshole. Whatever, you got to clear that stuff out. Component will receive props, gets the very next props or arguments that are coming into our class component. And remember, this is still just a function. So any of the arguments change that are coming in, it's watching them. And we can look at them before we do anything. So this would happen before the render method runs again. Component did update right after the render method ran again. We can look at our previous props and our previous state. And we can compare that to this dot state and this dot props, right? And then a really important one is should component update. And that's so important. I'm going to get rid of all these. I'm going to leave DidMount because we're going to use that in a second. Should component update, this one just returns a Boolean value, true or false. And you can look at your next props and your next state, which means you can also look at your current this dot state and this dot props. And you can decide if you really want this render method to run. And just to show you, if I return false here, right? Whatever I type over here, it is not going to update. It's like, nope. And that's because the reason we have this is like the very easiest way to optimize your component. To say, here are the conditions under which I do not want you to bother rendering all this JSX, or even looking at this part of the DOM. Just let it be. Do not change this unless, some condition. So very, 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 very handy. And just, it's so easy to optimize a component with that.
Hey, Joe, quick question for you.
Yeah.
You said, so those lifecycle methods wouldn't run, but aren't those inherited from the React component though?
Yeah.
So would the super version run though instead?
No, I don't think so. I think
Okay.
they have to be defined on your, it's a good question, but I'm fairly positive they will not run if they are not defined.
Just at all, not even
Yep.
the super version. Okay.
Yeah. I think it's literally like, if this dot component will mount, then go ahead and run it. But if it's not there, it's not
I see
there.
what you're saying.
Yeah.
I guess we could test it by extending our own component that extends React component and then putting those lifecycle methods.
Yeah,
in
you
the
go do
parent.
it.
I will
You want
do
to
it.
get up here?
I'm gonna do it. Don't you worry.
Okay, so I'm going to use component DidMount, and I'm going to do a little Ajax stuff here. And there's some people will tell you to do component will mount or do Ajax stuff in component will mount. Those people are wrong. If you're going to do Ajax stuff in a component, you're going to do it in component DidMount. I'm not going to bother giving you the whole reason why there, but do it in will mount. So I'm going to use fetch. Whoops. I don't know if you guys are familiar with fetch, but it's going to replace XHR. So if you've used XHR, XML, what the hell is XHR? Yeah, XML HTTP request. This is going to replace it. This will actually work. Almost everything I'm doing here will actually just work in Chrome today. But what this does is it kind of turns XHR into a promise-based fetching thing. No, not. So I have a little JSON server running here. I don't know if you guys are familiar with JSON server, but it creates like a little API for me. But all I care about is I can go to products, and I get all these products, and they have IDs and prices and descriptions, and most importantly, name, which is very handy for the code that we're writing right now. And so what I'm doing is I'm just fetching that product data, and when I get it back, I'm going to call it items, and I'm going to set my state of items to those items. And if you're not familiar with this, in ES6, if I have like items, it's going to equal items in an object. I can just say items, right? Nice little shortcut. All right, so now what I'm doing is in this little filter thing, instead of instead of items coming from props, I'm going to say items is in my state, right? Then, for the most part, this would work, but it's going to break. And it's going to break because it's going to say it can't find map of undefined. And what that's saying is that filtered items right here returns something undefined. And it's returned undefined items. Because what happened there, we did our fetch in component DidMount like we should. But render has already run and says, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. You don't even have items in your state. Because when we initialized this guy, we just said this.state equals search null. We don't have no items there. But here, I said set items to items, which is fine. You can totally do that. You can add new keys to your state. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But when render ran, and this filtered items thing ran, it crapped out on me because it's trying to work with this .state items and it's not there. And just for good measure, I'm going to take this out of the props so you don't get confused. All right, so we have to deal with this. And what we have to do is we have to have a way to render in this instance. And I'm doing this to show you like how we do this in JSX. But this is something that comes up all the time. Like you usually either want to have your initial state set up so that the render is going to work, or you want to have stuff in your render to deal with the fact that your state might not be what you expect it to be, or that it might change with something like fetching data. Like you might not have all the data right now, and you still need to render, hey, I'm loading or something. You can't have it, just crap out on you. So I'm going to say this.state, I'm saying not this.state.items, right? And I'm going to do a ternary expression here. So div loading. So if I don't have state.items, I want to show that div that just says loading, ... If I do have items, I want to do all this stuff, right? All the stuff we just did. Clean that up. All right, so I'm going to save that, and our error should be gone, and our guy came back, and everything seems to be working, but you can barely see that little search. So just really quick, whoops. I'm going to take this fetch, wrap it on a set timeout of 1.5 seconds, and we'll run that guy. So now 1.5 seconds loading, now the data came in, and everything works, right? Well, that doesn't work, but handmade car works, right? I think I can probably get away with zooming that out a little bit. Okay, so that's all working, but I really wanted to show you that we use ternary expressions in JSX all the time. And the reason for it is, once you're inside of JSX, there is no if-else. It doesn't exist. You can, here in my render method, I could say if, 1 equals 1, whatever. I'm not going to bother typing all this out, but I could say return a div, with something else, and just kind of go on like that right there in my render method. That's fine. But once I've started down the path of using JSX, there are no ifs inside of JSX. So we do a lot of these ternary operators, or one that's, equally awesome is, so if I have this state.items and div, something, or something else. So you see that lots and lots of times, and it can get a little crazy, but it's kind of the caveat of using this and needing to do expressions like this inside of the JSX.
Can you call functions inside of the JSX?
Of course, JSX is nothing but functions.
So those could also output strings,
So,
right?
like here, filter items, right? So, I mean, I'm interpolating it because I'm calling it a JavaScript function, but you got to remember, item right here is a function. All components are functions. So I can just represent those components or functions as JSX. They need to follow a certain pattern maybe, but I mean, to be honest, all they have to do is return a string, a Boolean now with React 16, or null, or another, or some JSX or whatever. But as long as they do that, yeah. And you could call it, and there's actually benefit. I won't go into it, but there's actually benefit. Like, let's say I had a stateless function component called loading, and then it just output that string. There is benefit to me calling it like this. So interpolating it and just calling it like that. Because as of the new React 16 with the fiber stuff, they have done a bunch of stuff to optimize stateless function components. But up until now, there's been no real reason to use a stateless function component other than it's easier, because it's somewhere in the background. It just wraps it in a class extends React.component. So there was zero benefit up to it. And somebody figured out that if you just interpolate your component instead of even writing it out in JSX, it was like 45% faster. Yeah. So, but now with the new stuff, supposedly fiber, that's the new rendering system. It's supposedly better. I don't know. We're using 16 right now, but I'm not covering a whole bunch of 16 specific stuff. Okay, so that's lifecycle methods and how to use them, and that's some little, some tricky parts of JSX. We have been working in this single file for a while, and I've already got some stuff kind of made up here, so I'm not going to bother you with a whole bunch of my typing. So I'm taking this whole guy and I'm killing it, and I'm replacing it with this code. Import React DOM. I'm importing a component that I already made called app. I'll show it to you in just a second. I'm importing a little style, and then I'm just rendering out this app component to the same place we had it in before. Everyone follow that for the most part? Like, we already had this. We've already done this. The only new thing here is I'm importing a component, and I'll show it to you in a second, and I'm importing some style because it'll make things prettier. For right now, everything's going to break. So the little app component, all it does is imports React. It imports the catalog that we just created with a couple minor tweaks to it, but it's I'll show you the code. It's almost identical to everything we just went through. And it's just rendering a div with catalog in it. That's all it's doing. I'll jump over to catalog really quick. Here's catalog, doing all the same stuff we were doing, except it's importing this catalog item. We had a thing called item. Now I've got catalog item. Doing all the same stuff. Notable difference is that catalog item now just takes in the whole item, because we're getting all this cool data from this JSON server. So now our item also outputs an image from that data, a name, and a price. That's it. So I'll save that. I'm going to zoom this guy out a little bit more. You can live with that back there? Okay. So that's kind of our new application structure here, and we're mostly just going to be working on this app guy for the time being. So just really briefly, I have a note here to make sure I show you this. I don't honestly use this that often, but I wanted to make sure you saw it. This thing called React DevTools. It's you can get it from the Chrome Web Store and install it. So this is our application, and if you're familiar with DevTools, like here's the regular Elements tab, and I can go through and see all of our HTML that's being generated, and that's cool. I mean, that's super useful. I can go to this React tab, and I get, so this is React DevTools. I get the React version of this. So instead of, whatever div with an ID of app, it's saying here's your app component, here's your catalog component, here's all your catalog item components, and it's showing me their properties that you wouldn't see as like attributes in the HTML. Like I can see the key, I can see the item prompts that are going into it, and more importantly, on this catalog one, which has state, is I can change the state right here. So if I want to say search is now equal to, what do we got there? AW for awesome. You can see it actually updated that state of catalog, which updated the rest of our UI. It didn't bother to put it into the input field because I never said that the input field needs to equal the state. I just said that the input field can update the state.
And you have to install the...
Huh? No, that's not how it works.
You have to install the React DevTools separately.
Yeah, you just go to I don't think they have it for Firefox. I don't know if anyone knows, but Chrome Web Store, just Google React DevTools and just add it as an extension or something in Chrome, and it just works. I mean, it detects that you have React in use, and it'll give you all that. So cool. That is React DevTools. Sorry. All right, so in case you guys aren't familiar with it, there's a term framework and there's a term library. React is a library. Frameworks are like Angular, and they come with a whole bunch of stuff and a lot of prescription for how to do things. React is really only focused on UI, rendering parts of your UI. And that's great because it gives you a lot of freedom, but it sucks because you got to stitch a lot of stuff together yourself. So I'm going to show you two things that, if you're writing a React application, you're going to have to get concerned with pretty quickly. And the first one's routing. So I'm going to bring in, it says React Router down, but that's just the particular flavor of React Router that we're going to be using. Routing, finding a routing solution for React is super easy. There's one. There might be others out there, but React Router has won that battle. It is the de facto router for React. I'm bringing in three things. One of them is hash router, but I'm calling that router because it'll be easier to type. Route and switch. Hash router is going to give us like hashtag URLs. If we were working in production, we'd use browser router, which would give us clean URLs, but as a byproduct of the way I set this up, I need to use hash router, so that's what I'm going to do. The way we're going to do this is I'm going to set up a router component, right? And this is going to be my new root component, wrapping all this stuff up. And where I had catalog, I'm going to replace that with a route. A route is a component from React Router. It has a path, and in this case, it has a component. So what I'm saying is that the root path here just said / I want to render catalog. And that's it, right? So I load that up, and hey, here's my catalog. I mean, it was there before, but it's still there. And if I go to some gibberish, it's still there. That's, not exactly what we want. So there's modifiers you can put on these guys, and our path itself can be made up of regular expressions. We can do all sorts of crazy stuff here. But the simple solution for this one is to add a modifier called exact. I need it to exactly be this path. So now I'm still on the gibberish. I don't know if the URL bar is good back there, but it's / a bunch of crap. And when I refresh, there's nothing there, right? When I go back, I'm sorry, I meant to go back. There's my component, right? My catalog page. So I'm going to deal with this empty one, and I'm going to create another route. And this is going to be for like our 404 page not found thing. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to kill path, so it's going to have no path. And instead of component, I'm going to say render. And this is going to be a function right here inside this interpolation. And what I could do here, because people ask this a lot, how do you pass props to a component in a route? You do it like this. Here's a function that returns catalog, the same component up there, and I could just pass in, items equals whatever right there. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have an h1, right? It says page not found. So cool. Webpack gets a little weird here, so I always end up having to manually reload a couple times. So there's my page not found, and when I go back, right, bam, there's my catalog. But hey, there's page not found too, and we don't want that. So React Router version 4 is just, it's amazing. It's an awesome, awesome library. And routes are just like these, they're just components now. There's not a lot of structure to this thing. I can take these routes and I can put them like anywhere I want. They don't have to be all nested inside of each other. You can have, you can just do all sorts of crazy stuff. But with that power comes some trickiness. And right now we're seeing that. And that's because a route that has no path will always render. So to fix that, I'm going to wrap these guys in a switch component, which I imported up there from React. And just like a switch statement, it's only going to render the first match that it finds. So it finds that first one. Now I do need to reload this guy. There's no page not found. And if I go to gibberish, there's my page not found. Awesome. And yeah, like I mentioned, at this point, Webpack gets a little bit weird when I first introduced that, so I'm going to restart that, and we're back. Okay, so all this routing stuff, what I want to do, let me make sure that's what I want to do, is I want each of these little catalog item guys, so each of these guys is a catalog item component. I want to like be able to click on them and go to a product page, right? So each of them should like have a button that says, you know, learn more about this product or whatever. So I have those guys, here's catalog item. So that's, this component is those little guys on the page that we can filter through. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to import React Router, and from React Router, I'm going to import something called link. Like this couldn't be easier, right? So now I've got this link component, and I can just say to where do I want to go. Now in my case, I'm actually going to interpolate. It's not required, but since I need to get some JavaScript into this, I'm going to say /product / and then you guys, has everyone used string literals in ES6? Right? So it's just, it's a token, and I can just $, curly bracket, say item.id. So I'll save that. Whoops, you know, I didn't put any text in that guy. So let's say learn more. Cool. So now each of these guys has this little learn more thing, and I can click on it, and I'm going to get page not found. But I can see the URL is /product /1 /product /2. So that's cool. So I've got a little product component right there. And all it's doing right now, I mean, you can see I've got some other stuff going on that I'll show you in a minute, but all it's doing right now is it's outputting an H1 with the word product in it. So I'm going to jump over here to our app, and I'm going to import that guy. Import product, right? And I'm going to create a new route for that. So it's going to be path product. Now here's where it gets interesting. I'm going to say /:ID. And if you've used, has anyone used, I don't know, Backbone, Angular, all that stuff? So this would probably be pretty familiar to you. Like, you know, you can have some sort of variable there in your path. And so I'm saying that the path is /product /something, and I want you to call that ID. Like whatever that something is, whatever that value is, I want a variable equal to ID equal to that value. So I want something called ID. Now the component I'm going to run or render here is product. So I load that up, boom, there's our product. But you know, it's just doing that H1 right now, right? So what I want here is like I want the product ID for right now, okay? Because I can get that from the URL. I can see product /2 or product /3. So React Router, when we are rendering that component, we automatically get some extra props that we didn't have before and that we didn't have to manually pass in. And one of them is called match. Do you guys get what's happening right there when I do that in curly brackets right in the function? So that's called destructuring. And so I know there's a thing coming in called, let's say, props. And I know that props is going to have dot match, right? So it's an object that's getting passed in, and I can just destructure that, and so I don't have to type all that out.
This is pick out only the match part.
Yeah, I could be picking out a whole bunch of things, but in my case, I'm just picking out match. So that match is a argument that we're getting from React Router, and from match, I can go to params and get that ID. Now, ID is what I defined in the URL, in the route. I said :ID. I said whatever's there, I want that to be called ID. And it sent it to me in the match.params, right?
Sir,
Yeah.
the camera died.
The camera died.
It just went beep, 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 beep.
Well, you know what? I don't really give a shit. I mean, push the button or something. I can't. The thing was charged.
You run out of space.
No, card's empty.
You're shooting in 4K though.
I'm sorry?
Memory card's full.
It says the memory card's full?
No, it says the cake is yellow.
You know what? I'm not going to screw with it now, so whatever. It's okay.
Shall I turn it off again?
No, this is good, because, you know, people usually pay for their I'm not giving it away for free.
For the second half of this talk, it will cost you $50 to see joemaddalone.com.
Okay.
All right, so we wanted to get that ID, and we've got that ID from React Router passed in this thing called match, and from params of match we got ID, and now I can see it there in the browser. And if I jump over here, click there, I'm going to get product 4. So very quickly, I'm going to uncomment all this stuff, which is
almost identical to what we did with the catalog thing. So I've just got it fetching its own particular product from that same API, and it does a little loading thing in case the state's not there, and then it outputs all the same stuff we just had for the most part. So I save that, and it's just, it's nicer looking. So go here, learn more. Going back on this, hitting back on this all the time sucks. So right up here before the switch, I'm going to add a header. I'm going to add a link to /, and inside that guy, I'm just going to put shop more, because that's a good name for a store. So I'm just bringing in link. I'm just creating one more link so that I don't have to keep hitting back. So shop more, learn more, shop more, learn more, right? Nice and easy. So that's, there's a lot more you can do with routing. React Router is awesome, but that's just a quick look at routing. So really quickly here, I'm going to do something painful. I'm going to talk to you guys about tests. Does everyone here write tests?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah? Yeah? All right. What are you using? What do you like?
I was lying.
You were lying. All right.
They're so painful.
Jasmine and Karma. All right. So testing is a thing that you have to do. And nobody likes it, but it's actually really easy. So this is my package JSON. If you don't know what package JSON is, you're probably in the wrong room, but it's a way to list out all the libraries that I want to install through Node Package Manager. And you can have a bunch of scripts, and I got a bunch that I'm using here, but the one I want to point out is test, and it's running this thing called Jest. And Jest is a test runner that I have installed here. Along with Jest, I installed Enzyme. I'll show you what that is in just a second. And a couple little adaptery things, and then I have Chai because I like Chai, but that's just an assertion library. It's not required for any of this. And then down here, right in my package JSON, I've got a quick little setup for Jest. There's these things called setup files that they just introduced, but I didn't have to do any of this. I just had to read a little tutorial, and it says, plug this one in there, plug that one in there, you're good to go. And then the roots thing, I set that up because I've got some tests written elsewhere, and if you don't tell Jest exactly where to read the tests from, it'll just spiral out and look everywhere. So that's all I had to do to get this set up. And then, I don't know, I've got that zoomed way out there so that I can have this space for you guys, but there's a directory here called tests. And in it, I've got a bit of JavaScript called app.spec.js, which is just a naming convention that you use. Jest will automatically look for that naming convention, maybe a few others. For my test, I'm bringing in React. I'm bringing in something shallow from Enzyme. Enzyme is a renderer for testing in React. It's got shallow, mount, and render, and these are all, they basically describe how much of your component do you actually want me to render out for you to test it? Do you just want, the basic JSX stuff, or do you want the full-on, here's the DOM completely rendered out? What do you need? So I'm just doing shallow, which would be the least of it. And then I'm using Chai to say, that's an assertion library, just a way to say if something is true, and all I'm saying it's okay. Like there were no errors when you ran this app component. So to run that guy, let me see. I got a whole bunch of stuff running because there's a bunch of crap I want to show you guys. I'll zoom this in. Way in. I'm just going to say test. Whoa. NPM test. Right? I think that'll work. So cool. It's running Jest. It automatically found that test. It ran it. It passed. I'm awesome.
Nobody in the room has the faintest idea what you just did.
So what's really, well, it ran a test. And it rendered that component out for me and said, you know what it renders? Way back there. Can you speak up?
Can you run that test with the full description and going through each unit test that it runs and listing them out as it does it?
So next thing I'm going to show you, and you get this for free with Jest. I'm sorry, did you have a question?
That's right.
All right, so here in the Jest command that I'm running with npm test, I could just run Jest, but it's neater this way. I'm going to add double tack coverage. So Jest includes something called Istanbul, which is a coverage library. So I run test, and boom, I get this awesome little table of all the tests that I ran that I think you were asking about. What's interesting here is it tells me all the coverage. So how many statements and branches and blah, blah, blah. But in addition to showing me information on app, it's also showing me that one test, how much coverage did I get on these other components. So when I tested app, that's the one that has a router in it, right? So one of those routes renders out catalog. And we know catalog renders out catalog items, so those got touched. It took a look at those for me and said, hey, when you run render app, you're touching on these. And so here's your coverage in those guys. Another cool thing that happened just now, and I mean, if you got a job, this is impressive. Like, you can show this to your boss. Hey man, where is it? Yeah, but it's not there now. So there's supposed to be a directory here called coverage, and it didn't show up for some reason, which is really weird. So I'm just going to run that one more time. Yeah, something went totally screwy. So I've done this a million times. I'm not going to bother going through it right now, but there should be, it should automatically generate a directory here called coverage. And inside of that directory, there would be a bunch of HTML where I can just load it up right in the browser and see exactly which lines were touched in the JavaScript. So it just formats this whole report out for you. And you can look at every single item that was touched, and it shows you how many lines each write. So what's interesting is you could say, I'm going to run app, I'm going to test app, render out app. And it can come back and tell you, well, when you did that, it ran this certain line 40 times, and you can look at that and say, well, Jesus, I need to do some optimization. Something's wrong. If I render this thing, it shouldn't run that line 40 times. So you can pick up a lot more information than just being able to show your boss, or your team that you're running tests. So sorry about that part not working. Okay, so of course.
You want to go back to the beginning of the jest part and maybe make an error so they can see what an error would look like?
Nope. I mean, if you want to see a failed error,
I know what it looks like. I just thought maybe other people weren't familiar with testing.
Did you see the test? I mean, do you think I spent a lot of time on this guy?
But it's not okay.
Is not okay a thing? I don't know if Chai has it's not okay.
Not is
I could say assert equal, 1. So that's not going to be true. So it's running the test, and whoa, assertion expected something to equal 1, and it doesn't. So there's the description of so app was my outer suite where I describe it. So like right here it says app, right? So that's this guy, and then inside of it I can have a bunch of these tests. And my first one was renders with no props, and that failed. So it's telling me it failed. That's the one that failed. You happy? All right. Okay. All right. So I had said that I was going to show you. So the React router part started off with you kind of got to do a lot of stuff yourself, and you got to get out there and figure out what solution you want to use. And we did React router. That one's easy. There is no other solution. So this next thing we're going to talk about for just a minute, and this will be the last bit of code, and then I'm just going to show you some cool stuff. But I am going to talk about this for just a minute, and I'm going to keep myself cool. State management. Components have state. We saw that. And I want to turn this thing into like a shopping cart. I want to be able to add stuff to the cart. These items that I have, I want to say add this to the cart. And I want to go to the cart and increase the quantity on that and remove one and see all the totals calculated. Basic stuff. And I could do that with React all on its own. And that's totally acceptable. I mean, I could do that by right here in our root component of app. I could give it some state that represents a cart, just like an array of things. And I could have some methods there to push an item into that array. That would be like our add to cart, right? And then I could pass that functionality down to, say, catalog right here, right? I could inject that as a prop, say, here's the cart catalog. And then it could pass that down to catalog item, and along with the method of add to cart, right? And then catalog item would have this method that comes in from props, and it would call it and would have to send it to catalog. And then catalog would get that information and say, oh, I'm sending this up to app. But you would have to write this out each time. And when app gets it, it would say, cool, put this item into the cart array, and that updated our state. So now run a render again, and everybody down there gets the new state, right? You can totally do that. And it's fine, especially on a small application like this. Like in this case, I would probably do that. larger applications, you can't do that. I mean, you can, but it very quickly becomes a complete and total nightmare. You can't tell where stuff is coming from, how to bind things. You're passing stuff down 4, 5, 6, 7 layers, and you got to kind of get it all the way back up there. So a couple years ago, Facebook came out with this thing called Flux. This was an architecture, not a library, not a framework. It was kind of tedious to build, to do it all on your own, but it worked. And it was a way for your components to subscribe to this store, this shared store. So this shared state amongst all these components, and the components weren't force-fed the state. They would have to opt in and say, I want to subscribe to this store, which was just a shared state, right? Just like our state of our component, it was a state of our application that components could subscribe to. And when it updated, they could know, like, hey, what changed? And they could operate on that. But very, very tedious. And we very quickly got like 900 different versions of it because it wasn't a library. So everyone turned it into their own library. And you literally got, I wouldn't say 900, but 100 easy different implementations of Flux until this guy, Dan Abramov, came up with something called Redux. Anyone ever heard of Redux? Redux? Yeah, see? Everyone knows Redux. It's awesome. I don't like it. So more recently, this guy, Michael Westrate, came out with something called MobX. I like MobX. The differences between Redux and MobX. Redux, you can go look at the source code of Redux, and depending on your level of understanding of JavaScript, you could probably understand that thing in a couple hours. You could sit down and rewrite it in a couple hours. Super simple to understand. But it comes with a lot of boilerplate, and it comes with an ideology. And that ideology is called immutable data. And we don't have immutable data in JavaScript. And that's all I'm going to say about it. MobX, lots of magic. Lots and lots of magic. If you don't like magic, don't try MobX. No boilerplate, immutable data. Okay, so we are going to implement MobX, or we're going to use MobX to run our little store. And I've already written up a cart store. And if you've never seen ES6, or ES7, sorry, this might scare you a little bit. So I'm importing observable and computed from MobX. I've got a class called line item, and I've got a class called cart store. Line item is each item in our cart, right? Cart store is a collection of line items. I've created this observable value called quantity, and I've initialized it with a value of 0. Or I'm sorry, this observable variable, all right? You can think of observable from MobX like state in our components. When it changes, everybody knows about it, okay? Constructor is just standard ES6 stuff. The way we're going to create these new line items is we're going to pass in one of our catalog items. We're going to say new line item with catalog item. So it just sets that.
Line 5?
Line 5. It's item. Property initializer. Yeah, we're doing ES7 now. That's this dot item.
Oh.
Yeah. So, and I'm setting that down here anyway, so it's fine. So computed. This is where I don't know if a lot of people get it, but MobX really shines here. So this is a getter. So when I want to call it later, I don't call it like a function. I just say line item dot total, and it's going to give me, my item price times my quantity, which is the observable part of it. What's great about computed here is it's going to cache that value. The first time I get it, let's say it returns, 10, whatever, quantity times price happens to be 10. And I call total again. It's not going to execute that function. It's going to return me a cached value. No matter how complicated this function is, I will get a cached value, cached state. The only time it'll ever rerun this is if an observable property or variable inside of this expression changes. So in our case, if this dot quantity changes, it'll run total again. But every time I call it thereafter, I'll get a cached value. So this could be a really complex piece of information that takes a lot of calculation to figure out. But if the observable items inside of this computation don't change, cache value. We don't need to compute that again until we need to compute it again. So cart store, same setup. I've got an observable array called lines, and I've got a computed value. So the computed value is total. This is going to be our cart total. The only time it's going to change is when lines change. And these lines, I probably should have written this out a little bit better, but if you're not familiar with reduce, I'm just cycling through the lines in my observable array. And these lines are, each line is a line item from above. So when I call b.total here, it's doing this computation on each of those. So I'm just cycling through saying, do your total thing and give me the total. Everything after this is not MobX specific. I got a way to find a line by an item, add an item. If it's not there, it's going to be 1. If it's already there, I'm going to increase the quantity. Decrease item. If I get to 0, I'm going to call this remove line guy. Remove line removes the line. So that's it. Like pure, basic, simple JavaScript stuff for our cart. So how do we get this into our application, right? I'm bringing in provider from MobX React, and you'll notice that's not MobX, it's MobX React. MobX is not specific to React, just like Redux is not specific to React. They both have like little React companion libraries that make everything work together with React in a React kind of way. So provider is a component. I'm going to bring that guy in, and I'm going to make it our new root component. So it's going to wrap everything. And into that, I'm going to bring our cart store. So I'm importing our cart store. I'm instantiating it as a new cart store, and I'm going to send it to this guy as a prop. So this is just another React component that's getting a prop called cart store. All right, that's it. Now, any component in my application that lives inside this tree can subscribe to that cart store and get all those updates. And what I'm going to do, I'm pretty sure this is what I'm supposed to do. I've got a little component here called add to cart, right? And what I'm going to do is I want to put that right down here at our, like on each of our little catalog items. But I need that guy to subscribe to the cart store. And you can see I've already got it here. I'm expecting an item to come in this thing called cart store as a prop. And then on the click of this button, I'm just going to call cart store add item. But I need to get it in there. So I'm going to bring in inject and observer from MobX React. And I'm going to decorate, and if I didn't mention it, that's what these things are, this symbolism here with the add symbol and then a function name. It's just a function that returns a new function. So somehow it intercepts the thing below it and gives you a new thing. So they're called decorators. So I'm going to inject cart store, and then I need to make this guy an observer of that. And that's it. This guy knows all about cart store now. It'll respond with cart store, and I can prove that by jumping over here to catalog item, right? So catalog item doesn't know jack about cart store. And I'm going to import that add to cart component I just made. And then right here, yeah, all right, cool. Add to cart item, right? So there's all our add to cart buttons, and I can click on them, and I promise you, it's going into the cart.
You just can't see it yet.
Yeah. So
is dependency injection, is that what that's doing? Do that?
decorators? No. Magic. It's magic. You know what? It's a lot like React has, or not React, Redux has the connect decorator, if you've ever seen that. It's a lot like that. I don't know. I mean, it's not as complicated as it seems, but it's just magic.
Orders it up somehow.
Yeah. All right, so you can't see it going into the store, right? So I've got this other one called cart link. It's almost identical to what I just made a second ago, and I'm just adding that up here in our little header. So cart link, now we got this little guy up there, gives me the cart total, right? So now I click here, you can see that going up. Everyone can see that?
Oh, yeah.
Richard, you see that up there? And did I bring the cart in? I didn't do the cart yet, did I? All right, so I've got a cart already built up. And I'm going to show it to you first really quick. Like, this is it. Everything that we've been talking about tonight is here. The only new thing is this inject part. So if you forget that, you guys have learned all of this tonight. I mean, this component has a render method. It's got some props. It's expecting this cart store thing. Here's a table, you know. I've got the cart store, it has lines. I'm mapping over them. I'm returning a JSX version of table rows, right? There's that key thing that we needed to have there. Here I'm interpolating, you know, here's a link from React Router, goes to the item. Here's the quantity, the total. Here's a bunch of buttons that just call those methods from cart store. And that's it. I mean, all of this is stuff we've been doing all night since the beginning. And if you remember, we started with React Create Element, man, you guys were bored.
Stop. Go back, please.
Go back?
Please, 1 second.
Yeah.
All right. No, don't go down. Up.
What do you
To
want,
the
man?
top.
What do you want?
Look at the observer. So it looks like you're doing the add inject first, which brings in the cart store. but that add observer on the same line is really applying to the class cart. Is that correct?
Yep. Yep. So the component becomes an observer component.
Right.
Cart store is injected into the observer component.
So what does the MobX do specifically?
What does a MobX observer do?
Yes, like what modifications does it make?
What does this observer
Yes.
change make? I don't know. Makes it work. It used to be, honestly, it used to be that you didn't have to do the inject part. You just did add observer and you passed in an array of all the stores you wanted to listen to. And that's really all it is. It's like a subscription. I mean, somehow it's subscribing to that piece of data without us having to pass it all the way down. And my guess is if you go look at the source code, just like every great React library, it's using something called context that React says you shouldn't use, but React Router uses it, Redux uses it, MobX probably uses it. They've all got like kind of the whitelisted blessing from React to use it, but everyone else is told like, we don't know if it's going to be around. But if they took React context out of React, none of it would work anymore. So a lot of times it's just dressed up versions of that. React.context is actually a way to do that idea that, you know, you have to pass things down. So imagine that I had, you know, app and then, you know, store area, and then before I ever got to catalog item, you know, let's say there were 15 levels from here to there. And the functionality from the cart that's all the way up in the app, I got to pass it through all these components that don't give a shit about the cart, right? But I got to pass it through all of them to get down to catalog item. React context is like a hidden little part of React that totally lets you just skip all those guys and send it down there. But in general, the documentation has always been very, very light on how to use context and whether you should use it at all. So I don't teach it. I've got some videos on it, but it's like, you can use it. Here's how it works. But they say maybe not. What's up?
So I guess this is kind of a really simple question from the earlier part. Is there any, like when it comes to what props you can handle, is it just we're all consenting adults and you can hand in any props and I may not pay attention to them and I may not pass them along?
In React in general?
In React in
Yeah.
general.
Yeah, you can it's just like a function. You pass me all the arguments you want.
Just because like Angular will bitch at you and say, hey, you don't have an input for that.
So
I'm not expecting to get it.
there's a ton of stuff I didn't cover tonight because I really wanted to get a lot of these broad strokes in, and I just want to show you some cool shit and quit writing code. But you can define the prop types that you're expecting. You can use something called prop types. And you say, I'm expecting an ID, and it's got to be a type of string, and I'm expecting this, and it's got to be a type of object. And you can also say whether those are required.
Oh.
But you cannot say, don't send me any extra
Because I would just think, because you could accidentally wire things up and be really surprised when it doesn't work if you didn't follow the contract.
So, but yeah, you can do that. And you can also do, there's a form of doing default properties. You know, and React is really, really simple to learn. And if you're, you know, actually interested in developing React applications, you can run with what I just showed you and get almost all the way there. And then there's a few other little things that you'd have to pick up. One of them would be refs, which is a way to kind of store a reference to a component. And it's actually a very easy way to get access to a DOM element directly. The other one would be default props, where you can kind of give a little API for your component and say, to somebody who might consume that component, you say, here's all the things I'm expecting. The only thing to let you know about that, though, is when you bundle all this, they are stripped out. Like, they'd never make it to production. It's just there for other developers. And like I said, there's a few other things. There's a couple new things. There's actually a new lifecycle method called component will catch, which is just a way to do better error handling within a component. But for the most part, I mean, I've given you the gist. And like I said, I really wanted to show you, you know, React Router, some form of state management. These are the things you actually need. And so really quick, I showed you that cart. That was just all the table stuff and, you know, the same thing. And I'm just going to create a quick little route. And then we're going to move on very quickly through a couple things. So the path is going to be cart. The component's going to be cart. So when I go to /cart, which is already loaded up in the browser, I'm going to get my cart. Now it's empty right now because none of this is storing anything. So I'm going to go to the store. You guys can see the little cart changing up there. Go to my cart, and here you go, right? So I can increase all these guys. and everything's updating. I'm not sharing. I didn't say, hey, cart total, get this from your parent and share it with this components down here, the line items, and total all this up. And I didn't put a lot of work into this. I just subscribed to the cart store, set up the cart store. The cart subscribes to it. This little guy subscribes to it. The add to cart button subscribes to it, and they just do their thing. So I can remove these guys and whatever, And if I wanted to, I'm not going to bother. I could come here to our product page and just plug that add to cart component in, and it would work too. So what you'll see there is I did it at a very small point. I didn't even bother saying like, hey, the whole catalog needs to know about my cart store. I said, you know what needs to know about it? Anything that needs to interact with it. It's just the add to cart button knows about it, and the cart knows about it, and the little, this little guy knows about it. But I didn't have to wire it up into every single piece of code in my application. Okay, I am just going to show you really quickly a few things.
One question.
Yeah, go. Any questions? I'll totally field them right now.
Can I use this
For like
with
2
the-
minutes, though. Go. Go ahead. I'm joking.
Can I use this with JSPs? Can I invoke React from JSP?
You want to invoke React from JSP. I mean, I'm going to show you some server-side React, but it's all in Node. Actually, I'm going to show you Next.js, but it's all Node Express type stuff. I mean, you could write anything you want in Java and have it output whatever you want, I guess. I just don't know why. But this is, I mean, it's a JavaScript library. So if you want to use a JavaScript library with JSP, good luck and go for it.
You can, but you'd be rendering an empty page in JSP. That's all you'd be doing. If you're going to use JSP, then use the session state management at the back end. Or you're just using it to host React. If you get into trying to manage front end and back end state at the same time, you are going to hurt yourself. Don't. But use your JSP to generate the services for your data. Absolutely, go for it. But don't try and mess with the HTML by rendering it on the server and hoping React's going to pick it up and play with it. That's not going to work very well.
Okay, so this on the left, is this starting to look familiar to you guys? Like, does this kind of look like stuff we just wrote? Okay, so, but this is React Native, so it's just taking React code and transpiling it to a native iOS application in this case. So this is an iOS iPhone simulator. You could actually get this onto your device really easily. So this is taking all the stuff we just learned. I mean, you'd be shocked. If you guys spent a week with React just really kind of getting down the basics, you are now an iOS developer. Like, you can just switch right on over to React Native, learn a couple new APIs. You can see they have all these little built-in components, touchable highlight and alert iOS and Android-specific things. But I mean, I wrote this little application 2 years ago, grabbed it yesterday, updated it to the latest React, tweaked a couple little things, and it runs just fine. What's really cool is when you're in here, or when you have it on your phone. So here in the simulator, I can do Command D to bring up this development menu. When you have the app, when you're running your React Native app on your phone in development, you just go like that, and it brings up the little menu. And then you can turn on, whoops, I did reload, but I meant to show you, I've already got it on live reload, right? So here's my little app. It's a little to-do app, right? So I come in here and I say this one's complete, save it, or I do a long press, and I delete that one. Whatever, right? I'm going to reload that guy, so it's got its initial state. And you can see right here, I've got state, just like we did in our other components. It's an array of items, and I'm just going to add one, right? So it's just got text and a name, or text and complete. But now there it is, and that'll work on your actual device. Like, it'll live reload right there on your phone. You got to go through a bit more setup to do it, or you can use this thing. I think we talked about it once upon a time called Expo, which is crazy because you could write your little React Native app and publish it and just give somebody a URL. And as long as they have this additional app called Expo, they can just load it right on their phone. I think you can get like a little QR for it too. So you can like get apps out there very, very quickly. If you want to go through the App Store, there's a bit more work to do, but you can get up and running, I mean, really quick. And this is all stuff that we just did. There's nothing new in here other than there's some cool components that are already built for you. Okay. So that's React Native. It's awesome, and the React Native isn't write one time and it publishes to both Android and iOS. It's you do end up having to write 2 different applications for most things, but there's one framework to work with, and the code is going to be very similar. It's just that they're going to have different APIs for the different devices. You can't do anything about that. Okay, so that's React Native. The other one I want to show you is, this might be it right here. All right, so does this look familiar, right? We just did some stuff like this. There's one little weird thing in here. I've got this props URL query X, but otherwise I've got a button that's decreasing this state of count and increasing the state of count in the other button. And then here's my state of count, right? That's like super easy to understand, if you've been paying attention. So, oh, that is not the right URL. So I've got something running called Next.js. So React can, we used to call it isomorphic, now we call it universal JavaScript, but it's JavaScript that can run both on the server and on the client. And I'm not talking about like, oh, the back end is Node and the front end is React. I'm talking about the same code delivered from the server and on the client, single code base, right? And the way that works, especially with React, and you can do this raw with React, like you can just bring in React DOM server, very small addition to React DOM, and you can do this on your own with like Express. But Next.js is from these guys called, this company called Zeit, and they're just mind-blowing. They're doing amazing stuff. So it's this great little framework, and all I did here is I wrote this little class of index, right? And what happens is the application itself is rendered in HTML. So we can do SEO stuff here if we want, because that's kind of hard in React, because we don't really have a lot of control over the document. We're just doing all this view stuff. Right. You need some server-side stuff or statically rendered stuff to do, like SEO or the title of the page, if you don't want to have to do it in JavaScript. I mean, in JavaScript, I could change the title of a page, but whether or not a search engine is going to pick up on that is, who knows. So the server is rendering this as HTML, and it's also delivering state to our client-side application. So it's bundling it up, and it's saying, here's your initial state, now you take over. So it can render the entire page with all the SEO stuff in there with whatever, full HTML, and then the client-side application takes over from there. So whatever is in the URL, we had a path to something, it'll render that application from the server, and then say, all right, now client-side, you take over from here. I can show you really quick that that is true. So, all right, let's look at it this way. Here's my network tab, right? And I've got this little bit here that says, if I have this query of X, use that as my count. Make sure it's a number. So here's X equals 1, 2, 3. And you see that call to X123, right? And now I'm going to do view source, and I'm going to have to zoom this way, way out. Whoops. So here's the button, right? So this isn't looking in the Elements tab, show me what did the JavaScript do. This is the actual HTML came down with 1, 2, 3 right there, right? So it rendered that from the server. And now the client takes over. So there's no re-rendering. The HTML is not changing here, right? So if I go back to view the source, it's still going to say 1, 2, 3, wherever the hell it went.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you guys see it somewhere, right? There you go. Yeah, so it's not doing any further server-side rendering. The client takes over from here. We can take over routing. We can take over everything from here. But what you get from that is, one, you can get the SEO stuff, and two, you can get a really fast application. You just deliver that HTML, and they can see everything while the JavaScript might still be kind of figuring stuff out. You can deliver UI immediately while the JavaScript starts to take over. And then the other great thing is if you turn off JavaScript, the backend will take over. So if you disable JavaScript in your browser, the backend will be like, oh, JavaScript's off, we'll take care of the rest then. So no more front end, but you'll get the exact same result. Next.js. From Zeit, they make Hyper, they make Now, they make some crazy, crazy stuff.
Have you heard of Gatsby?
Gatsby, you know what, I had that in my list. I didn't end up having time to put together an example of it, but Gatsby is a static site generator in React. So it generates static HTML for you from React components. It's cooler than it sounds.
Similar to Jest,
To Jest? No, Jest is no. Gatsby is a static renderer or static site generator, so it just generates a whole bunch of HTML. It doesn't serve from a server side. So the end result of Gatsby is like a process that you run locally, and now here's all your HTML you can upload to your website. Whereas Next is what's called universal JavaScript. So that component I wrote is run on the server and delivered as a client application simultaneously. Are you familiar with any back-end languages like .NET or Java or something?
I didn't. Just,
Okay.
just Node and
Well, then I can't answer your question, lady. Okay. Native. Oh, blessed. Man. All right. Really quick. I'm just going to show you, I think, 2 more, and that's it. So React Blessed, there's a thing called Blessed that is for building terminal interfaces, right? React Blessed, you can take React, they have this component called box, right? Everything it goes in this box component. It's got a whole bunch of properties that you have to set, widths and heights and positions and stuff like that. But then you create terminal interfaces, right? That's built in React. That's crazy. I think this one's pretty similar. Yeah, right. I think there's one animation, right? I think it just bounces a thing around. You can do whatever you want. I mean, it's amazing. Like, and you write it in JSX, so it looks like HTML, and you're just given the HTML attributes, and it renders to a terminal instead of rendering to the DOM or rendering to iOS or Android. We're rendering React components to a terminal. All right, that's blessed. I think I was supposed to do the next thing first. Okay, so this is one that I wrote a couple months ago, and if anyone would bother going to this with their phone, it's a lot cooler once I find it. It's probably in that other Visual Studio window. There it is. So I'm going to load it up in the browser too, but it's this is just one of those little shorteners. And the reason I'm saying to load it up in the browser is because it's using React VR. It's also using something called GraphQL and Apollo client, because I just like messing with new stuff and stitching it all together and see what happens. But React VR is really interesting. So it's bit.do/ReactVR. And the reason I said to go to it in your phone is because here in the, it was bit.do. Sorry, I'll bring that back up. I had given up on you. You see it? So I'll show it to you in the browser, but does everyone got the URL who needs it? All right, well, too late. So in the browser, I can like drag around and look around space, right? And I've got this connected to actual live data using GraphQL, and I click on people, and it brings up, it's connected to this thing called the Star Wars API, and so I click on C3PO, and I get that. But if you have this on your phone, like who's got it on their phone? Can I steal that for just a second? So if you can, you know what, because I'm turning, because you were facing this way, I think I can reset it. No. Well, the way to navigate around it is to actually turn yourself and look around, and you can look up at the menu and down at the menu and tap on the menus and so forth. And like when you're in one menu, if you turn all the way around, you'll see the other menu. I just left it floating off there in space.
I see.
And again, this is just React. In this case, we're rendering out what's called WebGL, but it's using these devices for people to look around. You could get into augmented reality with this. You can do a lot of things. There's a lot of stuff happening in the virtual reality space. But just to show you that really quick, so like I did Luke Skywalker. When I go back, you see that menu I just flew through? It's back here behind me. So if I'm doing that on my phone, I actually have to turn around to see it on my phone. And if you want to look down at the menu, you have to look down at the menu. You have to turn your phone as though you were in this three-dimensional space. So the React ecosystem is growing and growing and growing, and the stuff we're doing in React is getting crazier and crazier. Just about, and I'll just tell you this really quick. The reason it's happening is because React, the the ideas behind React have changed web development going forward forever. We just don't do things anymore the way we used to because of React. Angular 2, 4, whatever on, it looks a lot like React. They have a virtual DOM concept. They're not quite there with something like JSX, but JSX is the way to go. Templates are horrible. Like, nobody wants to use templates anymore. They suck. And they're a gateway drug to, like, you guys, Angular backbone template users, right? Templates. You render out your template with all this cool stuff, and then you have like some sort of on-click event on the guy, and it comes back to your JavaScript, and then you got to reach back out to that element to find out what its data attribute was or something. You're just bouncing back and forth. It's not doing what it was supposed to do. It's supposed to separate, the code from the UI, but it doesn't. So let's just put it all in the code. Anyways, so that's all I've got. I don't know if there's any questions. I'm happy to answer any. I think we're right on time, right?
Yeah.
Yes, do you want to be back to Maddalone again?
No, I don't. I told you it's magic, lady. Jesus.
So, specifically.
Did you see how quickly I went over that part? I talked a lot about it, and I said, and here's all you do. Bye.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to just go home and.
It's totally worthwhile reading because I actually work in MobX every day. It is my like the project that I'm working on right now. I could use Redux, I could use MobX. I sat and evaluated them, and I don't like Redux. There's some tricky parts to it too because you really have to treat like observable arrays. They are technically different than regular arrays. You get a lot of the same methods, but all of a sudden you'll try to do like a map or a filter, and it's like, well, that's not a goddamn array. What are you doing?
Is that why you got dot remove now on that?
Dot remove on that one, yeah. Well, that's a built-in. Yeah, that's a built-in one. Nice, right? But there's some things that you can't do, but you can do like dot replace to just wipe out an array. So there's some cool things, and then there's some where there's a to.js method on anything you want, and then you'll just get back a regular JavaScript whatever. There's benefits to the observable stuff, but every once in a while, you want it like, just give me a regular ass array. And a lot of times you have something subscribing to that, and then when you get it, you're like, I need to do a bunch of calculation on this thing, turn it back into an array, goddammit. And you do it just right there, you make a little clone for yourself and do it right there. That's the only time I approve of immutable data.
So, like in Redux, you have the whole reducer interactions and all that. And store,
Yeah,
like,
we don't do that.
Okay.
I mean,
But-
my
well, what
actions
about
are functions.
Okay.
I got so much. You tired of me yet, man? So my actions. So that's the problem with Redux. Actions, reducers. And all of that stuff is based on immutable data, because what Redux wants to do is have this, very transparent history of the state of all things. Time traveling is what they like to call it, and you can use their tools to go back in time and see, what if I didn't do this? What if I didn't do that? What if the state wasn't like this? MobX has those exact same tools. They just don't have the ceremony that Redux has with the reducers and stuff. So in MobX,
So, like, the store is the same
concept, yeah, it's a single state of a single state. It's a single source of truth, one place where all of our components can subscribe to for the truth. Actions are just, in Redux, you never want to change your actual state. You always want to return new state. So if our state was 1, we don't go back and change it to 2. We create a new state of 2. In MobX, we just change the state. We don't care about immutability. I mean, technically, under the scenes, there's a little bit of immutability going on there, but we don't have to sit through it and suffer.
Does you get tutorials?
MobX, I'm always going to point you to Egghead.io, where Michael Westrate, the author of MobX, has a series there, but I will tell you it's a little bit dated right now. It's a couple, some sort of versions behind, so that's just the way it is. But there's plenty of information out there. There's tons of videos, tons of sites. I think there's learnmobx.com or something, and somebody's got some nice little thing set up there. So there's endless amounts of information on MobX. It's been around about a year, maybe, I don't know, and people are very excited about it. But you are starting to see lines drawn in the sand, and I don't know if you can tell which side I fall on. It's not the Redux side. I like Redux. I mean, it's fine. I just don't want to work in it. It's a great idea. Yeah, it's a cool idea. It's got, you know, its own little philosophy and cult members, and that's great. Like, power to them.
So, like things like link and route and a few other things.
From React Router?
Are those sort of structural components? Is that the...
Well, link is a pure UI component. Link is just a link, right?
Okay.
Route, no, actually, so
It's
not
let me
anymore
ask it
because
the right way.
route
What's a
used to
structural
be
component?
route used to just be what you would call, like, you know, a structural component.
Okay.
But now they are full-fledged components in React Router version 4. I could take a route and just put it somewhere, not inside router, right? Just put it somewhere, put it on, you know, off to the side, and say, if the URL matches this, render this component, and it'll do it. It doesn't have to be, you know, again, it's like React Router has lost some of its ceremony. You know, they still have like a with routes thing. Like if you really need to do it the old school way, you can. But now you can just put routes wherever you want, and they're components that will render whatever you tell them if the route matches. That's it. There's no hierarchy to it that you have to have in place. I can just put a route anywhere I want, and if the URL matches, it will render whatever I tell it to. So router is just a component that renders, or route is a component that renders components if the route matches. That's it. Structural things like there's a concept called render props or functions as children. Those would be, you know, more interesting things. Like I'm not going to write one up here right now, but you could create like a common example is to create a fetch component, right? So it's a component called fetch, and it has a state of data that's null. And then on its component will mount, right? It does a fetch of state, just like we did in our little catalog. But then when it gets to its render method, instead of rendering out more HTML, it just renders out its children as a function. So remember, like when I had item, an item was just a function in the very beginning, right? The component item is just a function. So let's say my fetch component wrapped that component. And now that guy is my child, right? Of the fetch component. You can access that with this props children. You can get to its children. And so in my outer component, I can say, go get my state, and then give it to my children, and call my children as a function, the same way we did before. So in my render method, I just say item as a function, open parentheses, close parentheses. Actually, I say this props children, open parentheses, close parentheses, and I just pass that state of data into it. And then the component item, it's the inside of its JSX would just be a function that expects to get that information from its parent. You know what? That went way down there. I'm not going to write it up because it'll take like 5 minutes. But what's that? Oh, there's a ton of use cases for it, and the one that I just mentioned, fetch, is a really simple example. So I write a fetch component that has a URL, and then inside of that I have a function that's going to use the data that comes back from that URL. So I just write fetch, and as a property it says URL equals, you know, my little localhost 9000, and then inside of that is a function that consumes that once it arrives. Or actually it says, you know, it does what we did. You know, if there's data, then do this. If there's no data, then do that. So, and there's a million uses for it. You're not limited to just fetching data. You can have all sorts of. Imagine a component that tells you the width and height of the window, right? And I could wrap that around any other component, and any other component that's inside of it can get that information from that. So I've got, you know, inner width height component wrapped around image, and now the image knows the height of the window and the width of the window as soon as its parent component does, and we can operate based on that information if we wanted to. So, what's that?
And when that also leads to greater separation of concerns when you're doing your composition of your components. The fact that you can pass in data and then you don't let the data know about it, you can just pass it on.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the great thing about React. I mean, it's all about composition. The whole thing is about composing stuff and making things more composable. And it really tries to get at those little tiny building blocks that we wish we had. And just, you know, you stitch all these things together. I mean, there's tons of libraries out there that have like ready to go components that you can use. But a lot of times, I mean, you will find yourself making like these really common, simple components for yourself. And it's very satisfying to see, like, with a few little changes, all of a sudden everyone on my team wants to use this little component because it's just something that bothers everybody. Or now it's just so damn useful to have something that does a very simple thing, and you'll see, you can just keep building on that, and you'll end up with your own little library of components that you just want to bring into everything because they make shit really easy. So I mean, all of this that we've done here, I don't know that I've shown you anything like, some super useful, reusable component. This is more just to give you a feel of how these applications come together. And I think we started at the right point, and then, we definitely ramped up really quick to all this state management stuff. But at the end of the day, React is about UI. It's about creating views. All the rest of this stuff is extra. You get to decide how you want to do that. If you want to do it all in React, awesome. If you don't, there's React Router, Redux, MobX. And if you want to change your environment, there's React Native, React Blast, React VR, Next.js. I mean, and that's never going to end. They're just growing and growing and growing. More and more instances of new environments where we can use React. We good?
So thank you very much everyone for coming, but more importantly, thank you very much.